She's gone out today and made a quote saying that she wants to make Melbourne the townhouse capital of Australia. Now, I don't even know what that means. And in another crazy claim, in a week when she's announced 20-storey apartment towers and high-density living zones across 50 locations, including blue-chip suburbs like Toorak and Melbourne, Brighton and South Yarra, I would just ask, who's going to buy these places? At what price point will they be built at? And how long before any of them are actually constructed? It's a complete mystery to me. Incredibly, the Premier announced this plan at the weekend of these activity zones behind the locked doors of a Brighton pub on a Sunday afternoon. Now, as I said at the top of the program, the housing crisis will be one of the big issues, I believe, of next year's yet-to-be-announced federal election. We're joined in the studio by the Shadow Minister in Victoria for Housing, Richard Riordan. I don't really know what to make of this week of announcements. Is there anything real and concrete about anything that's been announced?
Well, the one thing we've learned over recent years, Steve, is no announcements from this government can be trusted or believed. Commonwealth Games, you name it, that's what they do. Unfortunately, the sad reality for people looking for an affordable place to live in Victoria, the wait's just going to get longer. The government was out today re-announcing homes they promised after the failed Commonwealth Games, and there's just no end in sight. The budget papers don't even have them starting till 2028. There's no solution there for regional Victoria. As to the apartment towers, you can build apartment buildings now in Melbourne if you wanted to. There's plenty of land to put them on in Docklands and other places. People aren't building them because they can't afford to. The market's so flat. Investors are fleeing. These are just big announcements with no substance, no money behind them, and it's just Jacinta Allan trying to look busy.
It struck me, Richard, that she's gotten in her head that she has to have her Dan Andrews moment. He had his level crossing plan that he instituted, and he took out level crossings and built those big ugly train stations up in the air. Is this her moment, her level crossing moment? She's going to tie her hope to be re-elected as Premier in 2 years' time to the fact that she's going to build a whole lot of houses.
Look, she can try to, but the whole housing management is a disaster.
Well, what are the developers telling you?
The developers are telling me that they just do not have confidence here in Victoria. They know it takes still way too long. They know that the planning issues are not right. The regulations for rentals and developers are just over the top, and it just keeps getting harder. And what we know is that no matter how much money this government throws at things, they're not making the problem better. Just remember, Steve, $4 billion nearly has been spent on their big fail, the big housing build. $4 billion, they've actually gone back 2,700 bedrooms, 54 homes. They're going backwards. What type of clever is required to spend that much money and go backwards so far?
Well, this sends people crazy because, they've jacked up property taxes right across the state. The land tax issue is huge. Why would a developer bother putting up an apartment block like that? It's not going to attract investors because the people don't want to pay land tax.
And it's not a solution. It's not a solution.
What is the solution?
The solution is...
Let's be positive because, with this government, you all have to be negative. What would you do?
Well, the first solution is the government flagged medium density as a solution. The opposition in Victoria agree with that.
Yep.
Medium density is the solution.
What's medium?
Medium density just means, no, it's not even in height. It's just better using the land we've already got in the suburbs.
But it has to be about height in a sense. You saw the reaction in Brighton at the weekend. The locals turned up outside the pub. Brighton and Toorak, it sounds like Jacinta Allan's just belting the toffs. That's not places for 20-storey offices.
No, that's my point. Medium density across our established suburbs is a real solution. It will densify. At the moment, we're down to less than 2 people per house on average. You put 2 houses on the one block, you're suddenly doubling the amount of space. That'll provide a huge opportunity for Victoria. We've got land out in our growth suburbs, the greenfield sites. They're just taking far too long to come to market. The solution is quicker planning approvals, better infrastructure. Instead of spending $100 billion on a tunnel no one's asked for, if we put that into freeway off-ramps, into train stations that have been promised for decades, if we put that into making Melbourne livable again, making it the most livable city for the people that live here and affordable, Steve. Think about it. A 20-storey tower in Brighton is going to provide a 1-bedroom dog box that is not going to be family-friendly. It's not going to be affordable. densify the city with medium density, encourage small builders and others to be involved in the solution, we'll get better outcomes for Victoria.
Well, I see that medium density already. We obviously need a hell of a lot more of it. I mean, if you drive down any of the major arterial roads in the inner suburbs, you do see 4 or 5 storey, but they're pretty upmarket. I mean,
Well,
that's
they're
not
upmarket
for people who need cheap housing.
The reason that exists is because it's so hard for the small builder, small developer to get involved into the market. Currently now, to build one of those developments, you might have to buy the land. You'll be sitting on it for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 years to get planning approvals. It's all too slow. And by the time that all comes, very few people can stomach that. What they're doing in other parts, in other jurisdictions, is you can buy the land with certainty that you know what you can do with it. If we can get it so you can build 2 and 3 townhouses per block as of right, conditional on certain setbacks and so on. If as of right you can do that, that will fast track and speed up development here in Melbourne.
She made this big announcement about how if you bought something off the plan, you wouldn't pay stamp duty. Well, hang on, that's a big risk. And young people buying off the plan like that, given the current collapse of construction companies, would you be willing to stump up the money for an off-the-plan apartment might or might not ever be built?
The Victorian Building Authority and the watchdogs that this government has overseen now for 12 years have been a disgrace. They haven't been held accountable, and the government has failed to look after the interests of consumers and home builders. You're quite right, there's very little incentive. And what's worse, Steve, that sort of token tax cut, and we all love a tax cut, but that token tax cut is for 12 months. Do you seriously think people are going to be in a position to have new plans, new opportunities drawn up, approved, planned and ready to go in the next 12 months? It's just not going to happen.
Have you done any, what's the social housing waiting list now?
The social waiting housing list increased by 3,100 families in the last quarter. We're now over 62,000 families. That's an MCG full of people
Waiting.
And these
Where
are people
are they waiting?
They're waiting in caravans. If they're domestic violence, they're back with their abuser. They're in cars. They're in car parks. They're in tents on the river. There's a squat of tents on the Eastern Freeway here in Melbourne.
That?
I'm not. I've been down there and visited them. There are people. We've got communities handing out tents in my own town, Colac in Western Victoria. The Salvos are giving people little tents to sleep in. That's how bad it is in Victoria. We're a first world country that spent $4 billion, and our social waiting list, our most vulnerable people, disabled, escaping domestic violence, single mums, the whole lot, are being offered tents and cheap motel units, and it's just not good enough. But guess what? We're getting a $35 billion circular railway to nowhere by sometime in 2070.
Don't get me started on that. This morning, I was on a train, a driverless train doing 100 kilometres an hour underneath Sydney Harbour, finished, complete, running perfectly in brand new stations. What do we got here? We've got a train line underground from nowhere to nowhere opening in 10 years.
If we're lucky.
Yeah, lucky, I don't know. Richard, thanks for coming in. I appreciate your time. Richard Riordan there.